upholding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. Were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration. Now, let me be clear on one fundamental point. The United States fully intends to be the world's preeminent leader in protecting the global environment.
Coming up, Technocracy News. Greetings from Technocracy News and Trends. This is Patrick Wood, Editor-in-Chief. Welcome to today's broadcast. You know that China really is the 800-pound gorilla in the living room, sitting on our couch for the most part. Most writers and analysts have no awareness that technocracy in China, even though it is acting in perfect accord with the so-called science of social engineering and exporting its population control systems to anyone who will take them. This is China today. They're not only doing it to their own people, but they're exporting the very technology and the ideology to other countries, including Western countries. So another article has appeared, and I titled this one, Concerns Rise Over China's Global Exports of Surveillance Technology. The article states, China has created a vast surveillance apparatus at home consisting of millions of cameras equipped with facial recognition technology. Now, some of the country's largest firms have signed deals around the world to sell their technology abroad. Experts raise concern about data being siphoned back to China, authoritarian regimes using technology to increase their power, and ultimately the Chinese Communist Party having more influence abroad. China's push to exert its surveillance technology via some of its biggest companies, including to liberal democracies, has raised concerns because of the risk of data being siphoned back to Beijing and the growing influence of the Communist Party, experts told CNBC. Now, everywhere that you hear in this article, the Communist Party, we really probably should be stating the Technocrat Party. But as I said earlier, most writers and analysts don't see that distinction. They still look at China in terms of its old trappings of communism and Marxism. The world's second largest economy has built a vast surveillance state comprised of millions of cameras powered by facial recognition software. The devices, perched on laptops and outside buildings and streets, are able to recognize individuals. Some of China's most valuable technology firms have been involved in such projects across the country, but this technology is now being exported as the nation's technology firms expand their global footprint. Chinese tech companies, particularly Huawei, Hikvision, Dahua, and ZTE, supply artificial intelligence surveillance technology in 63 countries, according to a September report by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace think tank. Of these nations, 36 have signed on to China's massive infrastructure project, the Belt and Road Initiative, the report said, adding that Huawei supplies technology to the highest number of countries. Some of these so-called smart city projects, which include surveillance technologies, are underway in Western countries, particularly in Europe, including Germany, Spain, and France, according to analysis by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Experts warned of a number of risks, including potential access to data by the Chinese government. I think that sometimes there is an assumption that, oh, well, when we roll out this technology, we aren't going to use it in a negative way. We're using it to provide services, or we're using it in a way that it is seen as acceptable, socially acceptable in our society, said Samantha Hoffman, a fellow at ASPI's Cyber Center. But actually, we can't be sure of that because the difference isn't necessarily how the technology is being deployed, but who has access to the data it's collecting, she said. If it's a Chinese company like Huawei, and that data goes back to China and can be used by the party in whatever way it chooses. Hoffman cited laws in China that appear to compel Chinese firms to hand over data to the government if asked. She did not accuse Huawei of wrongdoing, but she just used the company as an example. Earlier this year, Huawei CEO said he would, quote, definitely say no to any request for customer data from Beijing. By the way, whatever he says, we know that to be a lie because it's already been demonstrated that Huawei has a very, very close relationship with Beijing. Hoffman continued, I think we don't even quite understand the full scale of the problem that we're dealing with when it comes to Chinese surveillance technology when it is exported. It's not just that other regimes can use it in similar ways, it's that when it's exported, the Chinese government can attach its interests as well. Our next story has to do with China as well, not the technology so much as the entanglement that many companies in the West find themselves in with China. The title of this story is Elite U.S. Institutions Cave, that is cave in, to China's political demands. My comments on this story are, entanglement with China has allowed it to pressure the West to bow to its demands for censorship and accept its aggressive oppression of Hong Kong protesters. Meanwhile, protesters in Hong Kong are waving American flags, singing our national anthem, and begging for Western support to help them throw off the yoke of technocrat oppression. This article states America's elite institutions are catering to communist China. And yes, indeed, they are. The NBA provided the latest example Sunday night when League Commissioner Adam Silver apologized for Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey's tweet in support of pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. Rockets star James Harden followed suit and apologized to China for Morey's tweets. The Brooklyn Nets' new billionaire owner, Joseph Tsai, slammed Morey in a Facebook post Sunday night. Tsai, the co-founder of Chinese internet titan Alibaba, described Morey's tweet as so damaging to the relationship with our fans in China, adding that the hurt that this incident has caused will take a long time to repair. China Daily, the communist government's propaganda arm, used the NBA's conciliatory reaction to warn other companies to learn a lesson. The big Chinese market is open to the world, but those who challenge China's core interests and hurt Chinese people's feelings cannot make any profit from it. The NBA isn't alone in bowing to communist China. American universities have allowed the Chinese government to fund centers called Confucius Institutes that provide the communist regime with avenues to infuse pro-China propaganda into American academia. 89 Confucius Institutes were operating in the U.S. as of September 2019, according to the National Association of Scholars. Hollywood has self-censored for years in order to ensure access to the Chinese market. The U.S. government published a report in 2015 detailing how filmmakers tailor their messages to appease Chinese audiences and, more importantly, Chinese government censors. U.S. filmmakers self-censor scenes, dialogue, images, and themes they fear will jeopardize their film's chance of receiving Chinese approval for import, stated the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission's report, titled Directed by Hollywood, Edited in China. For a type of movie, particularly the global blockbusters, they're not going to go and make something that the Chinese would reject for social or political reasons, said Peter Shio, the CEO of independent Hollywood Chinese co-production studio, told the commission. MGM Studios digitally altered the 2012 remake of Red Dawn to change the invading army's nationality from Chinese, as was the case during filming, to North Korean. The Walt Disney Company threatened to boycott Georgia in May if a pro-life law took effect, even though the company apparently has no issue doing business with the Chinese regime, which is a notorious human rights violator. Well, This is just business as usual for China. As a technocracy, it has every intention of exporting its technology and its system of control to every nation in the world if it could. This is how you achieve a global technocracy, a global scientific dictatorship. And China is leading the way. I will point back, by the way, to the fact that China was brought onto the world scene by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1976. He single-handedly, according to political science experts even today, single-handedly brought China to the world stage, set them upright from having an economic system that was in shambles to being the second largest economy in the world today, based on technocracy. This was not a mistake. Brzezinski's original goal, along with David Rockefeller, when they set up the Trilateral Commission in 1973, was to usher in the new technotronic era, as Brzezinski called it, which was in fact technocracy from the 1930s. This is what he infused into China when he brought China back into the world fold. China readily adopted the principles of technocracy because it fit particularly well with their authoritarian form of government. And now we see the results today. They are the 800-pound gorilla in the room that wants to take over the world. The last story is a little bit of good news. The title on this one is, "The United Nations is running out of cash and is pleading for money." I can't think of a better thing to happen than the United Nations running out of cash. Why, they'd have to lay off people all around the world. They'd have to cut back on projects. They'd have to quit writing policy papers on how they're going to destroy the economic system of the planet and replace it with sustainable development. Well, they're meeting reality head on because even the United Nations has to run on a budget. My comments on this are a prolonged global recession could signal a death knell for the United Nations and for their plans to conquer the world's economic system as contributions dry up. President Trump may be less than generous in making up the difference. I wonder when the United Nations talks about green financing, if they're not just considering the green of the U.S. dollar. Well, most Americans are fed up with this and would like to actually kick the United Nations off of U.S. territory altogether. The story says the United Nations is running a deficit of $230 million. Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned on Monday, and may run out of money by the end of October unless world governments immediately meet their financial obligations. U.S. taxpayers would most likely be hardest hit by any immediate cash injection into the global organization. The United States is by far the UN's biggest financial contributor, providing 22% of its operating budget and funding 28% of peacekeeping missions, which currently cost $8 billion annually. The next two major contributors are Germany and the UK. In a letter intended for the 37,000 employees at the UN Secretariat and obtained by AFP, Guterres said unspecified additional stopgap measures would have to be taken to ensure salaries and entitlements are met. These might include holding less meetings and cutting back on travel and associated entitlements. Member states have paid only 70% of the total amount needed for our regular budget operations in 2019. This translates into a cash shortage of $230 million at the end of September. We run the risk of depleting our backup liquidity reserves by the end of the month, he wrote. Donald Trump has long pushed for reform at the UN and just last week warned that, quote, the future does not belong to globalists, close quote, and a warning to the organization leaders. In December 2017, Nikki Haley, the then United States ambassador to the organization, announced the federal government has reduced its contribution to the UN's annual budget by $285 million. She said, you treat us that way, we're not going to treat you very nicely either. Well, our dream would be that they flat out run out of money, that they lay everybody off, cut back everybody's entitlements, quit traveling all over the world, sticking their nose into other countries' affairs, and simply just wither up and go away. It would be a much better world without the constant meddling, threatening, and blustering of the United Nations. I'm Patrick Wood for Technocracy News and Trends. See you next time.